Hello, Brilliant. Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. I'm Alan Nixon here at Onward. I'm delighted to be introducing this fantastic panel that we've got for you today. We're going to be looking at the role of schools in both community, across the economy, and what they can do to really drive economic growth and improve our communities and much more than that. Because, of course, as we know, schools are far more than just teaching institutions, from learning your ABCs all the way through to quadratic equations and whatever else. They're vital to shaping our characters as human beings and becoming well-rounded individuals who go on to contribute to society. They provide vital services throughout our childhood, such as even nutritious meals, like health services, counselling, all this sort of thing. And also they're vital to driving social mobility. And with our social fabric program that we have at Onward, this is a key focus of ours here at Onward. So today we're going to be looking at what government can do to support schools to better fulfill these vital functions. What we'll do is I'll invite each of our panelists to speak for roughly 3 minutes, and then we'll open it out to questions. And just to introduce our panel, I'm delighted to introduce Rachel Wolfe, who is the founder of Public First. Also on my right is Hilary Spencer, who is the CEO of Ambition, an education charity, who are very kindly sponsoring us for this event today. On my left is Caroline Ansell MP, who's the MP for Eastbourne, and also on the Education Select Committee, and lots of other connections to education throughout her non-MP career. And then finally, on the end of the panel is David Skelton, who is founder of Artemon Strategy. Brilliant. So if I can just start off with Rachel, perhaps, to give some opening remarks, please.
Thank you. So I think the question is, how much should we think about education policy as part of our economic policy, and what do we do next, particularly with schools? So the first thing I would say is, which is fairly obvious, that of the different things that the government can talk about when it comes to the next election in terms of record, schools has to be pretty high up the list. Over the last 13 years, one of the areas where we have pretty unequivocal evidence of improvement is in children's ability in English and maths, as backed by the international school tables. And it's also one of the areas where we've seen consistent reform, which is not true of every area of government policy. So the government should talk about this, and it should be part of the record that they come to in the next election. I think, though, that we also have to recognise that there are some massive challenges at the moment, many of which are an aftermath of COVID. And to give the two most obvious to me, the first is that we have a real attendance crisis in schools, and that this could have pretty catastrophic effects for unemployment and the economic performance of particular areas and particular people. Because once you start being in a cycle where you're not going to school and you're not learning, it's very, very hard to get back. And we did a recent report which found that the sort of parental support for school attendance in many areas has completely collapsed in the aftermath of COVID, and that what seems to be a dramatic rise in mental health issues in young people. There were some stats last week suggesting that 25% of girls are in contact with the NHS for mental health issues now, which is something I would have found completely unimaginable when I first got involved in education policy 15 years ago. That combination means that we have huge numbers of people who are dropping out of the system, and they're often going to be in areas that were already struggling economically, which already had relatively low, what wonks call human capital, educational standards, and where we most want to improve things. So I think that is an absolutely massive challenge that there is going to need to be much more policy work done and promised to improve. I think the second thing that has happened is hybrid work. And hybrid work has been brilliant for lots of sectors. I'm a supporter of hybrid work. And we did some research recently that suggested that it's actually had a really positive effect on, for example, women and particularly mothers who work in professional services. They're much more likely to work full-time now because they don't have to do the commute than they were before COVID. But I think that it's been one of the real contributors towards the recruitment crisis in teaching, because when you size the value of hybrid work to people, it's really quite a significant percentage of pay. And so for the public sector, which fundamentally relies on people to turn up and be there all day, it is another thing when teachers are already grappling with what happened with COVID and with this kind of attendance and mental health crisis. It's another thing that makes it a less attractive career. I think there are lots of things other than money that we can do to make teaching more attractive. And I think there are lots of things other than money and other than fines that we can do to support people to come into schools and stay there. But I also think we have to recognise that we are in this trap in education, just as we are in many other areas of the public sector, where we have low growth, no money, and lots of things that need money. And this is one of them. So if I were still working in government and if I were doing education, this would be the things that keep me up at night. But I guess if I now go to opportunity, on the other hand, I think that the areas where we have started to see really exciting work that I think was forgotten for a very, very long time is in helping children who are not at the top end of the academic scale. Not just T-levels, but I think the lifelong learning entitlement, which is a policy that allows people to train on pretty much everything they want through their life, which encourages people who are not doing A-levels and university to find highly effective training, is potentially game-changing for a lot of students. And if we can show a better economic pathway for people who attend school, it's more likely they'll go in the first place. And I am actually genuinely excited about the the baccalaureate. I don't know what the Prime Minister is going to announce on it, but I think the idea that we should make sure that people are broadly educated so that they have choices in later life is potentially very exciting. So I think there are a lot of challenges in schools right now. I think we need to be spending a lot more time working on them. But I also think we can be quite proud of our record on education as Conservatives. And I do think that there are opportunities for policies in the future. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. Hilary, can I turn to you next?
Great, thanks, Rachel. So, it is important to say there are loads of great teachers who are doing great work every day. We know that really good teaching makes a massive difference to children's outcomes, both academically, but also socially, emotionally, and long-term, and particularly for the most disadvantaged children. We know that great teachers and schools make a difference to our communities. As Rachel said, especially during the pandemic, I think that's threw up a set of challenges for everyone. But in many senses, schools really stepped up to the plate there. And some have described themselves as sort of the fourth emergency service. But also, really good teaching and school leadership contributes to our economy. So we published a recent report with Frontier Economics, which showed potential returns to our economy of up to £10 billion for improved teaching. So there is clearly a really strong role for the quality of teaching and its contribution to our economy. But we do know that at the moment we've got a real retention problem. Teachers cite sort of burnout, stress, increasing pressure. You'll be familiar with much of this. Women aged 30 to 39 are the group who are leaving the teaching profession at the fastest rate. As Rachel said, COVID's exacerbated the gaps, more mental health issues reported by children, increased gaps in early years, actually. So school readiness, when children turn up to school, they are at very, very different stages. Now have always been, but it seems that that has been exacerbated by COVID, and then more challenges with behaviour and attendance. We've also got a recruitment challenge at the moment, with fewer people seeing teaching as an attractive profession. There's quite a lot of reflection in the sector about what is driving that. As Rachel said, some of that I think is wider societal questions around things like flexibility and attractiveness of different professions or different professional paths, but we are at the moment seeing a sort of double whammy of challenges around retention and challenges around recruitment. So, what can be done? There are questions around salary, workload, conditions around schools. The government is taking steps to try and address these. I think there is something about moving those more and faster. There's lots of reliable evidence, I would say this, because this is what we do at Ambition around professional development. But one of the reasons we do this is because we believe it has a significant positive effect on retention, motivation, and skills development. And there's a lot of reliable evidence which says that if you have access to high-quality professional development, you are more likely to stay in teaching and to keep getting better. So we would argue for more of that. Some of it also, though, sits with schools and with trusts who can use more of the freedoms that they have to offer things like more flexibility or reduce some of the admin that they put on some of their teachers. So there are some great examples of schools and trusts doing some of this already. And again, I think for me, more of those would be really significant.
Fantastic, thank you. David, can I come to you next, please?
Yeah, thanks, Alan. This is a really, really important discussion and debate. Really appreciate the invitation to speak. I'd agree with Rachel that great progress has been made, but I still think the class gap is too wide, and that's something I'd like to touch on a little in the next few minutes. This is based partially in personal experience. I'm the son of a comprehensive school teacher from Gateshead, and actually the school I went to at the point was what Blair described as a bog standard comprehensive. 12% of people left with 5 or more A to C's at GCSE. That became an academy and then was one of the best performing schools in County Durham after academisation. So it's a good living example of that. And I do think it's important that education policy is essential to levelling up. It's essential to narrowing inequalities and strengthening communities. And it's essential to ensure we have economic growth, productivity growth, and shared prosperity. And also, when we talk about the UK being the next Silicon Valley and being a leader in artificial intelligence, we need people with the skills to be able to make the most of that. So it's really crucial for the future of the economy as well. And just to reiterate, I think what started with the Blair education reforms became the Gove education reforms have made a real difference. But there is still much more to do, particularly in terms of the gap between more privileged and less privileged pupils. I think too many working class young people are still let down by the system. We're probably familiar with these statistics, but they don't get any less shocking. And I often come back to the great Ian MacLeod quote, when he said, it's no point telling people to stand on your own 2 feet when you've ripped the ground from beneath them. And I think still in too many schools in disadvantaged areas, the quality of education isn't what it is in better advantaged areas. So we all know the stats about that educational inequality in terms of vocabulary starting at 5 years old and getting wider as it goes to 16. So by the age of 16, the less privileged group are 20 months behind other children, according to the Educational Endowment Fund. And the particularly shocking stat around white working class boys and free school meals, only 24% getting 5 or more good GCSEs and 32% of white working class girls on free school meals. So I think that's an important challenge we need to set ourselves to tackle. And there was some interesting IFS research last year which showed as they did each income group, the higher up the income group you went, the greater the educational attainment. So it's not just free school meals, it's just there is a direct metric between parental wealth and levels of educational success. And we need to squeeze more out to ensure that our talented young people from whatever background are able to fulfill their potential. And obviously that continues into adulthood. So 70% of private school pupils become university graduates by the time they reach 26. That's compared to 20% of children from the poorest fifth of households. So it's a real disparity. And in terms of the quality of schooling, I think this class gap is illuminated by the Ofsted numbers. So 9% of schools in least deprived areas are inadequate or need improvement, and that's almost 40% in the most deprived areas. So these are areas where progress still needs to be made. So what to do? I think when we look at the next phase of education reform, the question that we need to ask is, will this reform narrow the gap between more privileged and less privileged young people? And will it improve the life chances of people from working class backgrounds? And will it help level up the economy? I would say I think that narrowing of the class gap in terms of Ofsted inspections and in terms of GCSE resource, I'd like to see some kind of target for that to be reduced within five or 10 years, because I think that still is a really stark divide. And the teacher recruitment issue is, as has been mentioned, really important, really crucial. And regarding the class gap, the question needs to be asked, how can we ensure the best teachers are teaching in those schools, in those areas that need the best teachers the most? So how can we give school leaders and trusts both the resources and the agility and the flexibility to recruit and retain the best teachers is a really important question to ask. And having those skills that remain relevant, the technology is moving so quickly. What is called the half-life of a skill, which is a skill becomes half as useful in a certain period of time, that's gone from 5 years to 3 years, only in the past few years of of technological advance. And the more technology advances, the more important it is for people to maintain their skills. So I think there's 2 points here. One, there is a role of schools at a community level to help with that lifelong learning and to help with that lifelong advancement. And two, it's making sure that schools are working with SMEs and businesses to ensure there is some kind of dual learning path and a vocational path which is genuinely on a par with academic education. And I totally agree with Rachel that T-levels, lifelong learning entitlement could be a real key to unlocking this issue, which obviously politicians of all parties have tackled for many years. And the final point would be that this really important community role that schools have. How can they boost their role in the community? I mentioned one in terms of lifelong learning provision, but also, should we be looking potentially at smaller schools which have a more active role within their community and have more of a identity in the local community as well? So that's something interesting to consider. And with the emergence of digital, that lifelong learning is more important than ever, particularly with artificial intelligence, etc. So what I would say is huge progress has been made, and we should be very proud of that. But we cannot take our eye off the ball. A lot of those seats that voted Tory for the first time in 2019, we're expecting many things, including economic improvement, but also they wanted their kids to leave school with the sense of hope and a sense of a really high quality education. And it's important we continue focusing on these areas over the next few years.
Brilliant, thanks, Dave. And finally, Caroline.
Thank you, Alan. Very pleased to be with you this afternoon. I do sit on the Education Select Committee, which I think reflects my commitment and my heart that education is absolutely fundamental to the future of our country. And prior to my time in Parliament, I was a teacher and head of department, head of year, deputy head, director of studies. I've done the sort of full gamut. I've taught in state schools, I've taught in private schools, I've taught children with special educational needs, I've taught Oxbridge candidates. So have quite a breadth of experience to bring to bear in terms of the discussion here, but also my work in Parliament, and did make a return to school when the then Secretary of State, Nadim Zahawi, put out that call to arms for teachers, former teachers, retired teachers everywhere, to step back into school, to keep schools open. Because did we not see in COVID just how central schools were to community? When schools closed, it was like turning off the tap in all sorts of ways. How reliant people are on the school as a totally important part of the sort of social landscape. So that was a rare experience to do, to go back as the MP, back to the classroom. And you can only imagine what some of the kids made of that. There'll be a book in that coming out soon. I've also served as a governor too, so very aware that I think we have some governors in the room. So schools clearly primary task has been around numeracy, literacy. To that, we've added quite a broad and deep curriculum. We've looked to schools to deliver also on preparedness for the world of work by dint of careers, advice and guidance, and creating all sorts of opportunities. And it's absolutely right that the school is that place of learning which goes beyond the curriculum. But I think, speaking for teachers everywhere, some of the expectation now on teachers, some of the pressures, I remember it really crystallised for me in a really shocking report that came out about the state of the children's teeth. So it was all around dentistry. And one of the solutions offered up, then, we could get teachers to supervise brushing sort of on arrival. And I do think sometimes schools we've looked to schools to be the answer to every question. And there's potentially a place for that, but are the resources there? Is the expertise there? I think to an earlier point made around the mental health of our students, particularly girls and girls moving into those sort of year 10, year 11 year groups. There is now that specialism in school around mental health. But too often we've looked to teachers or to school leaders to deliver on really important aspects of school life as something of an addition to their working week. So recruitment and retention is increasingly, or has always been, actually something of a challenge, because the role itself is towering. And yet the influence a teacher can have on an individual and on that then generation is inestimable. And almost any and every teacher who comes forward for training, because I've also been involved in the training of teachers, will talk about an inspirational teacher in their lives. And I would challenge everybody here present, there'll be somebody that your mind now pivots to, somebody at school who inspired you, somebody at school for whom you held them in high regard, and that's the prism through which then you see schools and you see learning. The challenges are deep and wide now, post-COVID. We were making really good progress around closing down the attainment gap. The truth around it is, in COVID, it's opened right up again. But again, if we come to schools in order to address that gap, we're missing a bigger picture, because in many cases, a significant number of cases, what is missing can be the home situation that children are coming from, whether they have the support there, and we saw that in COVID, whether they didn't or did have the IT capabilities, whether they had a parent who could sit alongside, whether they had a parent who could make the connections around work experience and the other things. So one of the things I've really seen bring a tremendous contribution to this whole landscape has been through the new holiday activity food programme. Because the truth of it is, during term time, kids in that same school will all have access and exposure to the same quality of teaching, the same learning opportunities. But in the holidays, which constitute months of every academic year, their experiences of life can be so very different, where some children will get the opportunity to travel and to hear foreign languages and to see different cultures and to experience a whole raft of stimulating and engagement things. Other children, it doesn't even begin to compare. Their parents might be under huge pressure financially, they're at work, and the children don't have the same stimulation, the same opportunities to engage. And that can be something quite significant in the September return and the issue around persistent absence, something I know the school commissioner, or rather the children's commissioner, is really, really committed to. So it's not just what happens inside the school gates or during the school day that drives some of the inequalities we want to see closed down, because the truth of it is we need every single child everywhere, north, south, east and west, to realise their potential and to be everything they can be, and that needs to be our goal.
Brilliant, thank you. Lots to chew over there, not least the announcement of Caroline's forthcoming book.
Yes.
But
maybe even a film. It's quite racy.
We're going to open up into questions in just one moment, but I'm going to take the chair's prerogative just for a second, if I may. And can I just dig into a little bit more of this question around how we can drive economic growth and level up the economy, as David put it, through education policy. I'd love to dig into a little bit more into the specific interventions that perhaps government can do, what more reforms might be needed, and that sort of thing. Hilary, could I turn to you to answer that question?
Yeah, thanks very much. As I mentioned, we published a report last week with Frontier Economics, which looks at if you improved the quality of teaching by a sort of achievable amount across the system in England, we could make a significant contribution to the UK economy. And so I think our view is that a key, not the only, but a key lever is continuing to build on some of the reforms around improving teacher quality, and we believe that making professional development an entitlement for teachers in the system would make a massive contribution to that.
Brilliant. Rachel, anything to add on that?
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, a modern economy requires a highly educated population. So the question is, what would you do about that? So I'll add to yours rather than sort of disagreeing. When you look at the UK economy and skills, where do you see big gaps? I think you see very big gaps in technical and further education. We're relatively poor at that. I think you do see gaps in how many people in this country are trained in kind of mathematics and English to a relatively high level compared with most other comparator countries. I think you see increasing big gaps with people who are just not turning up to school at all, and they're definitely not getting educated, or are dropping out of school, and they're definitely not getting educated. And I think you see real gaps still, although we've made some progress, in the link between employment and employers and training. So I think the apprenticeship system is still smaller than we would like it to be, and that's definitely a comparative gap. I actually think schools, there is definitely more we can do and definitely more we should do, but the quality of school education is something that has improved over the last decade. There are many schools where we'd like it to improve further, and I think some of the things we've seen through, for example, the free school programme, where we've created many of the highest performing schools in the country, could be spread further. But yes, there are lots of areas where we do not have an education system that is producing people with the level of training that the economy ideally needs.
Caroline, can I come to you next on that?
Absolutely. I guess one of the things I would really champion is in terms of literacy and numeracy, particularly literacy. There has been some serious gains, and everyone here, I'm sure, will rally around the idea that that is fundamental to success at any stage and in any sort of sector. But I think one of the areas that schools have perhaps more struggled in is around work experience and careers guidance. And we've seen this through one of the inquiries, because if we want that sort of boost to economic activity, we want young people to know where their skills lie, where their talents lie, where their passions lie. We need to direct them to a really fulfilling way forward. And teachers aren't necessarily always the very best at, and it's that bolt-on again, it's that period 8 on a Thursday, in addition to whatever your primary role is. So that kind of more professionalisation of work experience and work guidance in schools, I think, is absolutely vital. But so too is work experience at that younger age. And one of the things I was speaking about before is because schools really struggle. I had to deliver the work experience programme, which gives our young people that first taste of where they want to find their way in the world. And it was really hard to bring in businesses because it's hard work. And we've provided them with all sorts of different sort of challenges and barriers to overcome by way of health and safety. And it doesn't always turn out to be the most rewarding experience possible. And one of the things that we've really seemingly lost from the sort of economic landscape is actually those young jobs. I mean, there's nothing like actually having your first job to really understand and be work ready, to experience those expectations and to, be part of the team and, to have those kind of and develop those skills. So one of the things I'd really love to see us do in a much more sort of meaningful way is open up those opportunities for young people coming forward, because they're just not there to be had. The numbers have crashed in terms of those sort of 16 to 18-year-olds in employment themselves, getting that first experience, getting that taste too. We want to teach them about the sort of financial literacy. But wow, nothing speaks to you, doesn't it, than a hard day's work and what you're paid, and how hard it is to pull that kind of money together. Real time, real world experience. So I think certainly there is more work to be done there, but also more work to really promote the technical routes. And one of the best innovations in my hometown has been a new hub where we're looking to train the next generation of engineers and technicians around all the renewables. So it's really hands-on, very practical, full-time education, and something that is really, really important, particularly for those around 14, 15 who, they've been in full-time education for a long time, and actually they're ready to fly. They want to spread the wings. They don't want to be held in this very formal setting for all the years to come. So the earlier we can bring these opportunities to bear, the better, because then we're reaching a cohort who are currently not achieving within that formal setting, but given the smallest chance to move into more technical, more hands-on, more practical learning, they really fly.
Brilliant. David, anything to add at the end there?
Yeah, strongly agree with that. I think an important point is how can we open up that technical and vocational route at an earlier stage? So when some young people are getting demotivated by a kind of traditional education, but really want to kind of get stuck into the workplace, how can we look at what happens in Germany, what happens in Northern Europe and Scandinavia, where they start that kind of dual learning route, they call it, at the age of 13 or 14, genuinely in partnership with local employers, big employers, small employers, medium employers, and the employers are involved in curriculum design, and they do have a genuine role within the workplace, as opposed to just doing a week or two's work experience. And in terms of economic input, in terms of growth potential, starting at that stage and really engaging young people at that stage is a really important route, and it's been really effective in Scandinavia and in Germany. The second point for me, obviously literacy and numeracy will always be important, but what I call digital literacy is going to be increasingly important, not just for young people, but also for teachers. How do you make sure that teachers have the digital skills necessary to be able to kind of teach an understanding of how digital and tech works? So that goes back to kind of teacher training. It goes back to the agility of curriculum. About 10 years ago, everyone was saying everybody had to learn to code, and now coding is being done by artificial intelligence. So it's kind of going to the digital literacy thing as opposed to having a rigid curriculum. It's very difficult to change. So I think that agility is really important. And the role within the community is going to become much more important. I think a lot of us who've been quite interested in education policy often go back to a Jim Callaghan speech, which he gave in 1976 when he just became Prime Minister. And he rather shocked people by having a go at educationalists. And the quote I really liked was, the goal of education is to equip children to the best of their ability for a lively, constructive place in society, and also to fit them to do a job of work, not one or the other, but both. And I think that quote rings even truer now, given the importance of both. That's those skills that are needed to play an active role in an increasingly complex labour market, and also the skills, those softer skills that the kind of private schools teach, to play a more active role in society as well. So I think that kind of role within a community is increasingly important too.
Brilliant, thank you, Dave. Right, we're going to open it out into the audience. Can I have some hands up, please? Yes, we're going to take two at a time, I think, so we've got quite a few. So I'll take the lady there and the lady at the front, please. Just wait 1 second.
Can I just pick up on the last point about soft skills? I've worked a lot in the US, and my own life experience is single mum. My mum was an alcoholic. I went to the local comprehensive school on school meals, and it was a horrible upbringing. Based on all of that, I shouldn't have got anywhere. But I ended up becoming a partner in PwC on the top of my profession. And the two things, an observation from the US and from my own life, was taking responsibility for my life and not being a victim, and pulling myself out of my own life experience. And what I see in the US is they teach life skills really early on and responsibility for their life. And I think we miss a huge trick not teaching children responsibility and life skills, and then they have their own ability to pull themselves out of whatever life situation they're in.
Brilliant, thank you. And lady at the front there, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the discussion. I'm interested in hearing your thoughts on the potential reform of the A-level system and the replacement of it with a new British baccalaureate, because it has received quite a lot of criticism, not least because the expansion of the content would potentially be at the expense of the depth, and this will result in the poorer preparedness of children for university. Just very curious to hear your thoughts. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. David, can I come to you on the soft skills point, first of all?
Yeah, that's a really inspiring life story as well. So thank you for sharing that. I think your point about responsibility is really crucial, and your point about something which I think is really important. It used to be people used to make excuses for schools in poorer areas to have bad results and have people coming out with kind of worse life chances. We shouldn't be in the business of making excuses for schools. We should be in the business of making sure that everyone leaves school with the best possible education, regardless of whether it's in a poor area or in a rich area. Particularly if it's in the poor area, you should be expected really high standards of education. So that importance of responsibility, both amongst teachers, teachers should not be making excuses, and the young people having responsibility at quite an early age. And I think if you talk about the soft skills that will come with working in a work environment, that's kind of teaching those skills at a relatively early age as well. So having those links with business will again be important in the soft skills route as well. But I think that point about responsibility is crucial, and I'm pleased you shared that.
That's it. And that same question, Caroline, anything to add on that?
Yeah, well, I think the soft skills question really highlights one of the issues for schools, and that is Ofsted. Because Ofsted follow the money, as it were. What Ofsted measure the school are going to dedicate their resources to, they're going to prioritise, and it's top line figures. It's around GCSE performance, it's around levels of literacy and numeracy. And so that is one of the issues, particularly for the maintained sector, in the constraints of a very short school day, in actual fact. So I'm a great fan of actually extending the school day, having taught in both systems, because the truth of it is I'm not even sure that the quality of the teaching is different across the two. And actually many private school heads really applaud the training and the skill level of teachers who've come over from the state school in terms of how rigorous they are around recording and reporting. They're really, they're on it. But what private schools do so very well is the value added. It is those sort of softer skills, because it's lots of opportunities around the creative, it's lots of opportunities around performance, lots more opportunities around the sort of civic responsibilities. It's the wrap round and the value added, and where then you get a real uptick in soft skills, and no more so than in the area of something like public speaking, where private schools recognise that actually this is a really important skill for life. If you can address yourself to any number of different settings, formal, informal, large groups, small groups, they've really understood that, and it's an important part of what they do. So your point is really well made, but Ofsted and that single word judgment, good, whatever it might be, is often something that obviously school leadership teams will have very, very firmly in their mind. And when we're looking for them to do more, then we need an inspectorate, if you like, or a quality assurance, which recognises the much greater expectation that we have on the schools. And there are some comments around, well-rounded individuals and well-informed students and what have you. But the real currency around schools and what they're achieving is too often just around raw data and exam results.
Rachel, can I come to you next? I'm conscious that you have to leave a few
Yeah,
minutes
yeah,
early
absolutely.
as well.
So I'm generally considered one of the trad people in education. I really like knowledge and the EBAC, but this is going to allow me to crack out the two views I have that other trad people in education most hate. So the first is, there are two real oddities to the English education system. The first is that we start traditional school really early, much earlier than a lot of comparator countries. And it does seem to me rather strange that we simultaneously think that boys who've just turned 4 should sit in classrooms for relatively long periods, and that it is completely unimaginable that they should walk to school on their own the way that in Sweden or Germany 6-year-olds would happily be walking to school and be held to much greater standards of personal responsibility than I think we often hold our own children to. So I do think that we occasionally get the balance wrong, particularly with younger children, between encouraging them to be independent versus quite how early we do some aspects of formal learning. Because it's not obvious to me that actually we keep those efficiencies later. So that's my most controversial opinion. I can see Leonora frowning at me behind you. But on the other end, is one of the ways in which we are unusual as the English education system is that we narrow so much at 16. So that's actually quite rare. Most countries you would be expected to do some combination of maths, humanity, or English, or the language you're in, until you're 18. And you are also probably more likely to do a slightly broader university education than we do in this country. And it seems to me striking that we simultaneously do very, very well now in international tests in core literacy and numeracy through most of compulsory school age. But once you get to 18, we do much worse. And I suspect part of the reason for that is because we let people drop things. So I do think that there is a good argument for a broader education until 18. I think there are debates about what that looks like. Is it Scottish Highers or something more like a IB or similar? And I also, to David's point, think it is not as plausible as it used to be to expect 13-year-olds or 15-year-olds to decide what they're going to do for the rest of their life. And what you're asking them to do is make effectively irrevocable decisions earlier than I think is reasonable. If you're going to be working till, God, we're probably going to be working till at least 70, if not 80, at the rate that retirement age is going up, then you ought to be able to have choices to change, and that requires a relatively broad education. So I am a fan of more personal responsibility earlier, and I am a fan of broader education later.
Hilary.
Great. I've got two aspects to this. One is the policy, and the other is the implementation of it. So I think you're right. We are sort of, when you compare us to other countries, we are quite an outlier in terms of sort of this pyramid of narrowing at sort of 14, narrowing at 16, and then narrowing at university. That doesn't mean it's necessarily bad. It's just, if you compare it to other international systems, we're relatively unusual. So it's worth trying to understand why it is that other countries have made or kept their systems broader, and also to think about what are the components that we think are really valuable there. So quite a lot of countries look at things like functional maths and functional literacy, and they do keep those things. They keep children kind of studying those until they're at a sort of particular level. Other countries would say get you to do like the equivalent of sort of 6 AS levels, so you get the sort of subject breadth in that way. Other countries look at whether, to your point about, is there a sacrificing of depth if you only go for breadth. Other countries have different combinations of doing those. So I think there is a case for us thinking about, is the system as we've got it currently designed exactly what we want going forward? Which brings me to the next point, which is around implementation. So trying to change what we currently do in schools is obviously perfectly possible. Systems change all the time. Teachers, schools change in all sorts of ways. But if what we think is that maths to 18 is a really good example of this, there are lots of potential merits to the policy, but at the moment we've got quite a significant shortage of maths teachers in the country, and we know that that plays out particularly for the most disadvantaged kids. So if we're going to make a change to the way we do post-16 education, then we do need to think about pace, capability, skills of our workforce, and how we do that in a way that it actually gets us a system that really delivers what we think we want it to.
Brilliant. Right, can I ask 2 more questions, please? Yes, gentleman there and the lady at the back, please. Sorry, would you like to go first? And then, so would you pass the microphone to the gentleman there? Yeah, thank you. Sorry, go ahead.
I thought the point that you brought up about Germany and Northern Europe and how they really evoke these kind of technical skills quite early was very interesting, but it's also my understanding that in those countries where that happens, it involves a good amount of parental involvement and a little bit of testing into those things. And to my mind, the problem with that is, you know, it's all well and good when parents are super involved and when they care about these things, but what about parents that are less actively involved? How do you ensure that that is, you know, the children who need the help the most are actually getting it?
Brilliant, thank you. And gentleman there, please.
You mentioned the statistics around underperforming schools in underperforming areas. We've got priority education investment areas, EIAs, PIEAs. Stoke-on-Trent is one of them. But since Nicky Morgan, there's been a lack of courage in the conviction to do something about the change. We have all academies by 2030. That seems to have disappeared. We had Nicky Morgan and the infamous Zedton. That's disappeared as well. We've got an election coming up in about, I don't know, a year or whenever it is. We're going to be judging our record, and that record doesn't look too great for those kind of things. I include grammar expansions, whatever you may feel about that, faith schools, etc. It's a bit of a woeful tale. I'd like some comment on that.
Right, not least because I know you need to go shortly, Rachel, but can I turn to you just in that last question, because I imagine you might have some views on that, and then...
Yeah, we've known each other for a while. Tom was one of the early free school people. So I have to confess, I agree with this. I think that in the last few years, partly as a consequence of the churn of ministers and prime ministers and priorities, that some of the energy around school reform has died somewhat, and there's been some inconsistency, just as there's been inconsistency in almost every other policy area, and I think that is a shame. Like, I absolutely do think that. I don't think that should detract from actually... overall, maybe because Nick Gibb is the only one who hasn't moved, there has been significant progress and some consistency in how we do schools and teaching and the curriculum and indeed academies. So I think there is a record to talk about, but I also, this is going to be a controversial point, I also think that if we'd been having this conversation in a fringe 10 years ago, it would have been packed because it was where all the reform energy was.
Absolutely.
And it's not today. And I think that's because we're not taking it as seriously.
Yeah. Hilary, can I come to you on the parental involvement point, please?
Yeah, thank you. So thanks for the question. You're right. So parental engagement and parental involvement, we know, has a really significant impact on a child's progress, whether that's sort of early years in terms of access to words is a really good and quite sort of measurable example. But there are a lot of other things which affect parental engagement. Some of those are to do with maternal education. That's a really big indicator. But also socioeconomic circumstances in which their child is being brought up have a massive impact on a child's outcomes. And I think it is important for us to be really realistic about that. One of the challenges, I think, of systems which depend on parental involvement as a really big driver is that if you've got a parent who is really engaged and really keen and wants to be involved and wants to support you, that is brilliant, and all of those advantages accrue to you. The problem is if you are a child who started without some of those advantages and then still cannot access them for a combination of sort of plausible reasons, that the inequality that's baked into that and then exacerbated by the level of support your parents are able to give you is then something we need to work out how we address. Because I don't think we want to be saying to parents, don't get involved, don't get engaged, because we do know that it has a massive impact. But the question really then is, for those children who through no fault of their own aren't getting that support or engagement, what can we put in place to support them and make sure that their life chances are continually sort of boosted and improved through what we're trying to offer through education?
Brilliant. David, did you have anything to add on that?
Yeah. The point about consistency of focus, I totally agree with you, and I agree with Rachel as well, that certainly in the 2010-2015 period, and maybe slightly beyond that, it was clear that education was a real priority, and fixing these inequalities was the real priority. You haven't always got that sense over the past few years. There's been chopping and changing. There hasn't been the prioritization. There hasn't been the focus. And I think all of those stats I talked about before, they're still pretty shocking for some poorer communities. So it still needs to be an area of focus if we were to fulfill our potential as a country. One other point I'd like to make, which I didn't make earlier, about parental involvement, and two, about the community, is the importance of sport and the importance of sports facilities within schools. I think it's pretty criminal that government after government, whether they're Labour or Tory, have sold off sports facilities, which are just a crucial part of a school's role in the community. And also, frankly, for many people, where they learn that responsibility you talked about was on the football pitch or on the cricket pitch. And when they're not there, those loss of sporting facilities, those loss of sporting teams, does have a knock-on impact into those softer skills as well, and other life skills. So I think we need to do something to reverse that horrendous declining sporting facilities over the past few decades.
Brilliant. Right, I think we have time for just one or two more questions. Yes, so we'll go lady at the front there, and then gentleman on the end. We've got another mic on the go. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Hi, my question to the panel is sort of, where do we draw the dividing line between what responsibilities sit with a teacher and what responsibilities sit with a school? Because I think often we unfairly stack up the role of carer responsibilities, and you're providing breakfast and providing counselling unfairly onto teachers. What are some forms of supporting infrastructure that we can provide that are not directly provided by the teacher but rather by the school?
Brilliant. And gentleman on the end, please.
My question is about the issue of inequalities between school. Often you get good and outstanding teachers in good and outstanding schools, and not so good and outstanding teachers in not so good and outstanding schools. How do we make sure we level up a little bit on the education front?
Brilliant. Right, I'm going to unfairly characterise the first question as teachers versus schools, and then we've got inequalities between schools at the end there. Hilary, anything to mention on that?
Gosh, that's it. They're big last questions, aren't they, to try and address. To your question about what's the line between a teacher and the school, I think right now that is a really, really interesting question. We've seen reports, haven't we, of teachers feeling like they need to bring in breakfast for their kids. That is, I think, a clear example of where that's really, well, not even sure it's the school's responsibility if we're totally clear about that. So I think the part of the role of the school is to create the conditions where the people in it can thrive, whether that's the children or whether it's the staff in their school. So there is a clear responsibility, isn't there, for schools and school leaders to provide a framework within which teachers can spend as much of their time as possible doing really great teaching. That's what they came into the profession for, and that's what we need them to do. I think where the tension comes is so many teachers are so invested in wanting to support the kids who are in their care that sometimes those lines do get a bit blurred. And I think I don't have a clear answer for that. I think you're highlighting a good issue. I think there is a role for schools and school leaders in trying to think more about what the supporting conditions are for teachers so that they don't feel that they have to be mental health provision and providing breakfast and all of those other things, even though those are things that teachers feel they most need to do in some cases, and that's what they think they're doing to do right by the children they're looking after. That doesn't feel like a sustainable position for teachers to be in. So I think you're onto a good point there, and I don't think there is a straightforward answer.
Right, in about 30 seconds each, if I can ask. Caroline.
Well, I completely recognise, the sort of thrust of your question there. Teachers will recognise that children who are hungry or upset can't learn, which is why they will kind of come in with those kind of strategies. But we do have to be really careful about their role, which is why the work of pastoral teams in the school is so important. But the most impactful thing those pastoral leads can do to support those children is engage the parents and engage the family home, because actually you cannot compensate for what doesn't happen after 3:30 when the bell goes. So it's really important that schools have a part to play, but the most important thing they can do is really engage with family.
David.
Yeah, just to answer that question, which I think is a really, really important question. And it goes back to Caroline's point about the importance of inspirational teachers and how inspirational teachers can genuinely turn around someone's life. And what we need is those really great inspirational teachers to be in those schools that are not performing at the moment. And frankly, that could be a financial issue. How do you incentivize the best teachers to move to schools which are not regarded as outstanding? Otherwise, you have a self-perpetuating cycle where the good schools get better and the schools towards the bottom kind of spiral. So it partially about finance, about how can the poorer schools pay teachers better to incentivize them to relocate? Is there other elements of relocation package to do that? And I think it really needs to be the focus. If the priority is how do you help those schools who are not performing and they're in the poorest areas, you really, really have to think about incentivizing the best teachers to go there and change people's lives. Because that is the key to unlocking so many of these questions.
Brilliant. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for today. 3 quick thank yous from me. Thank you to you, the audience, for all your brilliant questions and for participating in this discussion today. Thank you to our panellists for what I'm sure you'll all agree has been a great discussion. And finally, thank you to Ambition for partnering with us on this event today. Thank you, everyone. Cheers. Hecklers at the front, is it?
No.
Yeah. Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Yeah, it's just got a little bit dark outside. Welcome. Welcome to our sort of makeshift daytime TV studio. My name's Adam Hawksby. I am Deputy Director at Onward, and I'm absolutely delighted this evening to be in conversation with Tom Tugendhat, Security Minister, leadership candidate, and person that's...
In the past,
of course, sorry, and someone who, Onward, we are enormously proud of the impact that we can have across government. We're very pleased when our policies get picked up. We are pleased when our staff get nicked as Downing Street advisors, but we are particularly pleased when people that were central to our foundation and our advisory board members go on to great things. And our original advisory board included amongst it Neil O'Brien, one of our founders, now Public Health Minister, Kemi Badenoch, Gillian Keegan, and of course Tom, who was there right at the beginning at Onward, making the case that the party needed and would benefit from new ideas and renewal. And it's something that Tom's been at the forefront of for the past few years in a variety of different roles. And Tom, I want to kick off the conversation with something that's a really core part of Onward's mission. One of our earliest papers was one called Generation Y. See what we did there? Where we were kind of asking, why is it that young people are moving away from the Conservative Party? Why is it that the average age at which someone is more likely to vote Conservative increases at many elections? And the insights from that, a more recent paper called Missing Millennials, has been trying to encourage the party to take more seriously the generational challenge it faces. And at our Future of Conservatism panel yesterday, you highlighted a poll which showed that 1% of 18 to 24-year-olds were intending to vote Conservative. What on earth do we do about a problem like that?
Well, look, I highlighted that, and thanks very much for having me this evening. By the way, it's not just government that steals off Onward. Onward stole off me. Alan Nixon, who's now at Onward, was one of mine, but there you go. The theft goes both ways. What I was highlighting there, and the reason I was highlighting it, is because I think this is a really big challenge. And it's not just a challenge because, of course, I want the Conservative Party to win, and therefore I want Conservative voters, but because I think Conservative ideas are fundamental to the future liberty and prosperity of this country, right? So if we're not getting Conservative voters, if we're not convincing people to vote Conservative, are we not embedding those ideas? Are we not expressing those ideas properly? That's the challenge. And when I see those polls, or when I saw that poll of 1%, what it really spoke to is the fact that our country is far too divided. Mm-hmm. We've effectively been divided by those who have a stake in society, whether that's a house or assets of some description, or those who don't. And what we're seeing in the 1% is we're seeing an expression of those who don't and don't think they ever will. Mm-hmm. Now that's a real problem, because it's very hard to belong to a society if nothing in it belongs to you. Yep. It's just really difficult. Yeah. If what you want, and as a Conservative we do want, if you want unity, if you want to come from my current portfolio, if you want national security, you need to have a stake in the nation. If you want community security, you need to have a stake in the community. And in order to have that stake, you need to have some long-term expectation of being part of it. And that's why, moving from generation rent to generation own is not some sort of neo-Thatcherite idea. It's fundamentally about making sure that you get long-term investment in every sense in communities. Investment in the sports club, in the theatre group, in the church, in the scout group. That you get the investment in a much more personal way in the family, in having kids. You don't get people, people don't want to have kids if they don't have stability at home. People don't want to have kids unless they have the strong impression that the place they're going to send their kids to school is going to be the place the kids are going to be able to stay at school for several years. Yeah. So you need to get beyond the transitory nature of generation rent into generation own, and that's where belonging matters, that's where unity matters, and that's where we need to be making that transformation. So, when I see the things that Michael Gove has done recently on house building, again, that's not some sort of Margaret Thatcher tribute act. That's a promise to future generations, or in fact current generations, that they too can have a stake in society. And just in case you're wondering, this isn't just about young people. This is about everybody. You know, I'm lucky enough to represent a fantastic community where there are many people who are slightly older. And every question about housing starts with, where are my kids going to live? I want my grandchildren to live near me. I want to see my grandchildren. I want to see my children.
Yep.
Now, they can't have that. They can't have their family near them unless we enable that generational equity, that actual investment for everybody.
Something we find in all of our polling as well, when we ask about net zero and why people might be enthusiastic about that transition, the number one example that comes up isn't because they want to save the planet or because they want to save money off their bills through renewables, it's because they want to leave a better world behind for future generations. That intergenerational impulse is something we see and is really strong. But what do we, you know, you mentioned house building as one of the things that we can do to tackle this as a material offer. One of the other things that comes up often is childcare, that we need better support for childcare. That was a good win, Onward supported win that we had kind of 6 months or so ago. But the risk with some of this stuff is often what it means is the state doing more, right? I supported the childcare policies, but they involved a massive increase in state subsidy of childcare. Some of the house building stuff involves big state intervention. How do we make sure that as we're trying to win over younger voters, the impulse isn't immediately towards the state? What are the respective roles of kind of state, family, community, markets?
So look, I think this is one of those areas where you've got to look at what the state can do, and you've got to look at what you're enabling. And here, I mean, one of the things I think about when I think about the state is actually, funnily enough, about one of my first challenges in this post. Many of you will remember when Her late Majesty the Queen died. There was this extraordinary outpouring of grief, and in many parts of the country people wanted to come together. Many people came together in London. I can tell you that was one of the biggest security operations this country has held. But security wasn't about closing down London. It was actually about opening it up, but opening up in a safe way. You can't have crowds of people coming together if there is a risk that somebody might do them harm. You simply can't allow it. So the way you enable large crowds to come together is you enable people to do it safely. And so there was a huge security operation, much of it completely unnoticed, but there was an enormous security operation conducted by the state in which enabled people to come together. Now that's the way I think about the state in these factors. You're not thinking always about the state providing, but the state enabling. And this is where, you know, we just spoke about housing and we spoke about multi-generational living together, not necessarily in the same home, but certainly in the same area. What you're talking about there is the state valuing family, not defining family. None of the state's business what a family looks like. Your family may look very different from mine. It may have one or two parents. They may be, you know, biologically or adopted. They may be male or female. That's not my business.
Yep.
The state's business is to enable the environment that best helps individuals to succeed. And so enabling family, enabling multi-generational support, enabling the kind of childcare options or the kind of work options or the kind of housing options that enable people to succeed is fundamental to what the state is there for. The state shouldn't be thinking about providing. The challenge when the state does provide, and this is the socialist model, that the state should provide, is whenever the state provides, it has to. I mean, it just has to provide equally. And we're not the same. We're not the same. We want different things. We need different things. We need different levels of support. We need different levels of engagement. So what the state's job should be is to enable us to be valued as individuals and to be able to succeed in our own communities and our own families so that the country succeeds as a whole.
Is that a view that is, in your opinion, shared by young people, right? And, you know, we're using a kind of broad, so let's say millennials, right? So let's say kind of 18 to 40-year-olds-ish. There is an argument that says that this generation that is coming through has fundamentally different values and attitudes, right? So they are more likely to favour equality over liberty, for example, right? These are broad terms. But therefore they are going to be more open to arguments that are made by the Labour Party or others and less inclined towards conservatism. Is that the sort of argument that you find persuasive, or actually do you think we're missing something?
No, I don't buy that. And I don't buy that. Like many MPs, I speak at a lot of schools every year, and I meet a lot of young people who are, talking about their futures. Now, broadly speaking, because they're at schools, it's more 16 to 18-year-olds than 18 to 24, but I'm not sure attitudes change that radically. And I speak to quite a lot of student groups as well. And one of the things that really strikes me that's different from my generation, in my generation everybody wanted to, well, most people wanted to join large organizations. They wanted to join the civil service, they wanted to join the investment banks, they wanted to join, the graduate training scheme at Mars or whatever it happens to be, right? They wanted to join large organizations. You speak to people today, many, many more want to start their own business. They want to start an app, they want to start, a not-for-profit, they want to do things that they have got real agency in, real control over, that really enable them to express themselves. What they're looking for equality of opportunity. And they're right, because equality of opportunity is, I think, what actually equality should mean. Because if you end up looking for equality of outcome, I can tell you what that means. That means a race to the bottom. It always does. And Margaret Thatcher spoke about it, and many other people, even funnily enough, Tony Blair has spoken about it. You need to have the opportunity to succeed, but you can only have the opportunity to succeed if you can also fail.
Yeah.
And that's where we, as a society, need to get better at valuing the lessons from failure as well as the lessons from success. And that's a challenge. But if we really do mean to talk about equality, we need to be talking about equality of opportunity. Otherwise, we're not talking about equality. What we're actually talking about is constraint.
And how does tax play into that when it comes to young people? Because, a graduate now on an average salary faces a marginal tax rate of about 55%. When you add in things like student loan repayment and whatnot, it is mad when you kind of look at the graphs at the incentives that they face as they're earning. And that seems to be where a huge amount of the tax burden currently falls, but it's not where a lot of the discussion is when we talk about reducing the tax burden on different groups. Does that have to be a big part of the offer to young people alongside some of the other things you've described?
Well, you see, I'm sure everybody's seen those tax threshold charts.
Yeah.
They look like
we're Onward. We love those things.
Yeah, exactly. I know you do. You're a geek. But these are tax camels. There's a double bump.
Yep.
And the first bump comes when you're in your 30s. You've got kids and you're still paying your student loan, and your marginal tax rate can go as high as 70-odd%.
Yep.
And there's a second bump where people are earning just over 100k, and there's another marginal hit at, I think it's about 65% at that point. Now, that's not healthy, and we all know it's not healthy, and we need to actually be looking at ways of smoothing that. Now, that's not just about a tax giveaway. That's not what it's about. What it's about is about incentivizing people to take risk and to take the promotions. One of the best companies I've seen operating in this space is Greg's. Now, one of the things that they do that I think is absolutely phenomenal is not just that they have employee ownership schemes where you get a share of the profit. Quite a lot of companies do that. Yes, it's important, but it's not the only thing. One of the things that Greg's does is it will offer promotions taking the risk itself. Because for a lot of people, accepting a promotion, if you need to care for somebody in your family, or if you need to have restricted hours for one reason or another, you may not want to take a promotion because you're risking losing fixed hours for a promotion that may not work. And what Greg's does, what they have done, is they have given promotions accepting that it may not work. And if it doesn't work, you can go back to what you had before. Now that's a difficult thing to manage, because that means you've got different people at different levels in the company, and you're playing with your employee matrix in a different way. But it's an incredibly important way of making sure that people who you think can succeed take the risk and demonstrate their own success. And the same is true for tax. If what you're using tax to do is simply to, in the old expression, to pluck the goose with the minimum amount of squawking, then you end up with these oddities. If what you're trying to do with tax is to enable people to take risk and to promote their own interests and to profit in a way that actually benefits the whole of society, then you're looking at a different chart.
Let's talk about the economy more broadly, because I guess you have, so when I've seen you before, sometimes you've been very clear that one of the best things that you can do for a business sometimes is step out of the way, right? Allow entrepreneurship to flourish. And I think that's a really interesting thing about kind of your politics, that sometimes you're identified as being a bit more on the One Nation wing of the party, but actually economically, to be crude about it, you're quite dry, right? Someone that is keen on quite a small state and for businesses to have the space to grow, to experiment, to innovate, to fail. How has your experience as Security Minister shaped your thinking about the economy? Has it made you more open to or persuaded of the need for a bit of state intervention to increase the resilience of the economy? How has it, if at all, shifted how you think about the economy and growth?
I think the most important thing that I've learnt in this job is the need for resilience. Mm-hmm. Right? If you have a single point of failure, that single point will fail. You can't run an effective economy where if one thing goes wrong, the whole thing collapses. You need to have distributed systems. You need to have different ideas. You need to have different people trying different things to find out which one will succeed. And so actually, forgive me, but it reinforces my point that the government can't pick winners, that it's not up to the government to make sure things succeed. It is, however, up to the government to make sure that there is a platform off which people can take risk. Mm-hmm. Right? So the job of the government is not to go to some of the many startups that are here in Manchester and say, you're going to win, here's the money, you're going to lose, forget it, we're going to ignore you. But to create a platform on which those who have the ideas, the energy, the aspiration, and frankly the drive are able to succeed. And those who, for one reason or another, fail, are able to look again at the lessons they've learned and start again. Mm-hmm. Because it's only if you get that start again, only if you get that re-injection of energy, that you draw the lessons from before and you see the ability to succeed. Look, if you look at the startup sector around the world, most importantly in the United States, of course, you see many, many firms that have been started by failure. Mm-hmm. By which I mean, whoever started it, whether it was an individual or a group of individuals, the first thing they did failed. It may have failed for very good reasons. It may have failed because somebody forgot something. Whatever it was, many of them fail. And it's only on drawing on those lessons that they've then succeeded. But what the government has had to do, the reason the government matters, is not because the government has stepped in to say, I support this or I oppose that, but because the government has created a platform that enables that. Now that's why, EIS and SEIS investment schemes are so important, because they recognize that failure is a part of success. What we need to be doing is looking at how our entire economy needs to build together for that resilience. Because I tell you, as Security Minister, one of the things that concerns me most greatly is not that we can't rely on others. We can and we must. But we need to be careful who we're relying on and by how much. Yep. And if you want to see the most clear lesson on this, it's PPE. Right? Everybody remembers in COVID that there were many, many different companies who were selling face masks and protective equipment and whatever it was. All around the world, there were all these companies, and we thought we had a distributed system where hundreds of companies were making this stuff. Well, it turned out it wasn't. There was actually only a handful of companies in China who were making it. They just had many, many distribution channels, and we didn't know. Yep. So building up resilience is absolutely crucial, and that's where thinking about who makes what where, who our partners are, who's reliable, is absolutely essential to our security. Not what the government does, but what the private enterprise does.
And I want to come back to that question of China and reliance as well in terms of your broader role on security. Yeah. But let me just quickly say, one of the reasons that our economy sometimes lacks resilience is because of our skills and talent pipeline, right? That what we struggle to do, businesses can't recruit, we can't grow in key industries, we struggle in some sectors or in some particular technologies where we might need to suddenly massively expand production or build onshore, whatever else it might be. You wrote a foreword to a paper that we did a couple of years ago on apprenticeships as being one of the really key ways that you could do that. And the fact that the apprenticeship system now didn't necessarily do what we wanted it to do. It was more about middle-aged current employees that were looking to do management qualifications than young people getting technical skills. To what degree have we cracked that? Have we made progress on the skills pipeline? And what more work is there to do?
So first of all, look, the very fact that our education secretary is an apprentice is a fantastic demonstration that this government takes that seriously. The left talks about it, the right does it. And it's absolutely clear that when Rishi chose Gillian to be Education Secretary, he was making a very clear statement
Yeah.
that apprenticeships matter to him and matter to this government. He's absolutely right. Because this is not just about parity in the sense that we say an apprenticeship is equivalent to a degree. People need to feel it. People need to feel it in their bones. Now in Germany, for example, if you are a highly qualified apprentice, you're known as a master. That's a parity of respect, parity of esteem. Mm-hmm. Here in the UK, too often, we have seen universities used as a social signifier rather than a real qualifier. And this is where, we need to be looking at apprenticeships for what they really are, which is a delivery mechanism for highly skilled individuals. Now, we used to have this in the UK. When solicitors were studying, they were called articled clerks. Uh-huh. When doctors were studying, they went to med school, not to university. These were forms of apprenticeship. We didn't call it that, but they were forms of apprenticeship, as in, hands-on studying under experts. Yeah. We can get that parity of esteem. We've had it before. And what it does is it really deepens the resilience of our skills base, because it makes sure that we have that level of expertise throughout the entire system, and that's hugely important for us all.
And before we move on to the kind of China, a more formal element of your security brief, one of the things that businesses need in terms of that enabling environment is a degree of certainty and consistency. Yeah. And a couple of weeks ago, we saw a week or so ago, the speech by the Prime Minister about net zero.
Yeah.
And regardless of the kind of merits of the individual policy announcements there, one of the challenges that was levelled at the Prime Minister about that announcement was that what it damaged was certainty for investors, that there was kind of chopping and changing was difficult. Do you think that's a fair criticism? And if so, what do we need to do about it now?
So look, I mean, I have to say, I think it's a fair criticism of every democracy. Uh-huh. And the problem with democracies is we have to respond to people. If you want certainty, the Chinese state will give you certainty. Uh-huh. If you want certainty, Putin will give you some form of certainty, though it may involve a window that you weren't expecting to see open. If you live in a democracy as we do, you have to deal with the society as it is and the pressures as they are. And I think what the Prime Minister is doing is he's looking at what's deliverable and making sure that he can, quite rightly, achieve the end. What the Prime Minister hasn't changed is he hasn't changed the number of vehicles that need to be qualified, as it were, by 2030. What he hasn't changed is the 2050 goals. What he hasn't changed is the absolute commitment to achieving net zero, not just because actually it matters. As we all know, the UK's emissions are now probably below 1% of the global output, but because it enables UK business to invest with certainty, knowing that we're going to achieve those green targets that will mean that so long as various of us do our job on cybersecurity, the Chinese aren't going to nick it off us, right? Uh-huh. And that is enormously important. And what the Prime Minister is doing, I think, is making sure that those promises are deliverable, not just empty targets.
Yeah. So let's talk about China then. I mean, when you were a backbencher and chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, you were very vocal about the risks from China, kind of well defined and in a nuanced way, but broadly sounding an alarm that potentially we were not taking seriously enough some of the threats that came from the Chinese state. Now, in Security Minister, obviously you have a range of responsibilities relating to managing that threat or things that emerge from it. What do you think are some of the underappreciated elements of our relationship, of our struggle with China, that might not get properly covered in policy discussion or in the media? What things do people need to understand that you've seen at the coalface?
I mean, look, one of the things about reading the papers that I now can't tell you about, but reading the papers that I read every day is I keep looking at them going, I kind of knew that, but it's worse than I thought it was. Uh-huh. And time and again, I keep thinking, exactly, something comes out. And the challenge is that it's very difficult to get people to fully appreciate quite what's going on, because people quite reasonably say to themselves, look, who am I? Why would I be a target? Why would anybody be interested in sort of little old me, if you see what I mean? Yeah. Well, it's, in intelligence terms, you're always looking for a needle in a haystack. But if you're looking for a needle in a haystack, first of all, you need a haystack. And what many intelligence services are doing is they are building the haystack of information in order to extrapolate future outcomes from it. So what China is looking to do is they are looking to build that level of knowledge into our system, whether it's our economic system, whether it's our financial system, sometimes our political system, to find the points of pressure, the points of leverage, and then to find ways in. There was one of our colleagues in Parliament recently who very decently explained a phishing attack that had happened to him. An academic had sent a paper to one of his researchers who had forwarded it on to him. The academic, quite reasonably, didn't think of himself as much of a target. Mm-hmm. He probably wasn't. But through the researcher, got to a colleague, took over his entire computer, and has since made hay with it. Mm. That's what I mean by a whole of society response, and that's what I mean by, in some ways, it's worse than you think. It's also better than you think. Actually, the capabilities that our intelligence services have are phenomenal. Mm-hmm. We've got some extraordinarily dedicated individuals who are delivering some fantastic protective systems to the United Kingdom and, by the way, to our friends and allies as well. You know, we talk about global Britain. I think one of the most important ways in which we really are global Britain is the way that our intelligence services are protecting not just ourselves, not just the Five Eyes, but actually many other friends and partners as well. And that's an enormously important part. But you know, I'm afraid when I look at what China's doing, one of the things that always comes back to me is why Britain is different, why it is so important to the UK. And I think it's worth focusing on that. You know, we built over 200-300 years, yes, building on the Dutch efforts, building on European partnerships, building on the US and all the rest of it. We built an international system that, broadly speaking, works in English. I don't just mean the language, but it works off concepts of law that we have embedded, concepts of property law, concepts of accounting, concepts of administration that we built into it. China is the first power to truly challenge that. Mm-hmm. So it is a fundamental challenge to the UK's ability to operate in the world, in a way more so than other countries. Other countries are much more internally focused. European countries are much more focused on Europe. The United States has got a much bigger domestic economy. Mm. The UK is not just global by design, but it is actually the arterial network of the global system. And so when there is a challenge to it, a rerouting, a rewiring, it is much more of a fundamental threat to our economy, whether that's the insurance market, the finance market, the accountancy, the services, whatever it happens to be, than it is to many others. That's why it matters so much to Britain, and that's why our response has to be so much more resilient.
And what does that rewiring look like in terms of how we do security? Because I mean, for people that are unfamiliar, and I probably broadly include myself in this, you sort of think of our apparatus of intelligence being, I don't know, a chap with a newspaper with two eye holes cut through it, right? Like, what are the mechanisms that we have historically been using that might have been inherited from a Cold War era that might no longer be relevant? And what capabilities do we need to develop?
Well, you've got an iPad, right? You know it's got a camera on the other end. That's the upgrade on the.
Oh, that's it. Okay.
Yeah, that's what it's for. Uh-huh. Didn't you? No. Look, our security has changed remarkably, actually. And when you look at the way we're reforming our intelligence services, forgive me, but there's a lot I can't tell you about. But there's an awful lot of work that's going in there. And in fact, some of it's building off some of the things I was talking about before. Some of it's building off apprenticeship. Some of it's building off startup cultures. Some of it's building off a resilient economy. There's an enormous amount going in there, which is actually transforming not just the intelligence world, but actually the environment around it. Look, if it's not raining and you decide to walk around Manchester, I mean, for both hours than the year when it doesn't, mm-hmm. then you'll find that every place you're going to around here, there will be a small business, a small startup that is doing something creative and imaginative. You'll find the same in Newcastle, in Bristol, and London, and many other parts of the United Kingdom. And we are getting so much better at bringing them in different ways and in reaching out to them. So the National Cybersecurity Centre, which helps them protect themselves, and the NPSA, the National Protective Service Agency, is doing enormous amounts of work at helping them defend themselves. But it's also drawing on them and drawing on the knowledge that they develop and the imagination they've got. And that's hugely important. There's another area, I think, of reform that's really important. I mean, if you imagine your James Bond of the 1950s, if you like, as a white man from a public school background, where if you were gay, you know, you were, at very least it was illegal and you were very often punished. If you saw our intelligence services today, there is no way you could walk into one of our offices and say, oh yeah, you look like, you know, a spy off Central Casting.
Yeah.
They don't. Our intelligence services reflect our society in the most complete way possible. And I really mean that. I mean, the number of briefings I get from people who come from every ethnicity, every sexuality, every gender, every single spectrum of society is enormously empowering. And it's not just empowering because it means you can blend in a certain bar or mix in a certain community. It's empowering because what they're giving is they're giving through their different cultures, their different perspectives on the world. They're helping to address the challenges that we face as a community and to bring a different perspective. I mean, I've had the great good fortune in the last year of being in rooms where it's my job to challenge, to ask what are we really doing about this threat, about that threat? What are we really doing? Have we got the resources? Have we got the approach right? Are we thinking about this in the right way? And to have people of different ages, different ethnicities, different genders, coming back with answers to questions I hadn't even thought of, in ways I hadn't even begun to think of. Because what they're doing is they're looking through their own eyes, not through, as it were, the establishment eyes, as it were, that you'd think of from the 1950s. And that is hugely empowering. Now that reform really matters. But there is a next level of reform we need to get to, because actually one of the things that our intelligence services have quite rightly been focused on is, of course, the collection of secret intelligence. I mean, that kind of goes with clues in the name, right? They are looking to find government secrets, steal them, and share them with our government to make sure we're better informed, better prepared. The reality is the world has changed in the last 20 years. So much of the world is now public. Now, it may not be public in the way that's sort of, splashed across the front page of the Times, but the telephone directory is public. The employment records of many companies are public. The way in which governments are thinking about things, data sets are public. So much of the world is public that actually a lot of intelligence today is not about collecting secrets, but collating open intelligence, open information to understand secrets. Now that's different, and that's why, and you'll have seen at the back of the integrated review, this government committed to setting up an open source intelligence unit. Mm-hmm. Because actually we would be the first Five Eyes country to do it, first of all, but that's where recognizing that what we've seen in Bellingcat, for example, on exposing what's happened, understanding what's happened in Russia by looking at Facebook, by studying, people's photos on Instagram or on Telegram channels, you can understand a hell of a lot. And what we need to be doing is looking at those open source elements and understanding better what's going on. That's exactly where we're looking at reform.
Interesting. Okay, I've got loads more questions, but I'm conscious that I've been hogging the discussion and I want to open it up to the floor. I'll take a couple of questions at a time and then let Tom riff on them. Let's go with the question at the back there, one at the front here, and then if there is one more, I will take that one. Yes, one just at the front here too. So yes, just at the back, if you say your name and the organisation that you're from, that'd be great.
My name is Elizabeth, and I am from Board Intelligence, which is kind of working on cybersecurity.
So can you hold it? My hearing's really bad.
Sorry, no worries. My name is Elizabeth. Thank you for being here tonight. I was really struck by what you were talking about with China earlier, and my particular question is around Chinese infiltration into the education system, in particular in higher education, and I'm wondering kind of what your thoughts are on that.
Fantastic. Okay, let's take the question from the front here.
Thank you. Kat Sommer, NCC Group. I'm very heartened to see you talk about cyber and whole of society approach. Got a niche question. What are your thoughts on next steps for Computer Misuse Act reform?
Interesting question.
Computer, here we go. We're in the on conversation with now. Computer Misuse Act Reform. Yep.
Good evening, both. Thank you so much for the session, really informative. My name is Dan Laws, here on behalf of My Life, My Say. We're coordinating the National Youth Voter Registration Campaign in the lead up to the next general election, so I was really interested to hear that I'm leading that this year for 2024. One of the things we didn't discuss in depth was Brexit. It's hard to ignore it that 70% of 18 to 24-year-olds wanted to remain. Just wondering what your advice would be to the Tory party going in messaging regarding trust. I would really appreciate your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Excellent question. Okay, so broad range there. China in education, the Computer Misuse Act, youth voter registration, and Brexit.
So China in education. Look, this is something that does come up quite a lot. And it comes up in different ways. Sometimes it's connected to the Confucius Institutes, which are platforms, sometimes for influence operations within our university sector, trying to silence debate amongst often students from China, overseas students from China, but also having a knock-on effect on UK students because they effectively create a culture of silence that our universities find hard to challenge. The second area that comes up quite a lot, I'm afraid, is through research collaboration that ends up seeing ideas either stolen or simply bought and taken overseas. Now, these are both areas that we have very serious concerns over. And certainly on the Confucius Institutes, I have, I think, been on the record for a number of years with my thoughts on this, and they haven't changed, I'm afraid. Because the reality is that you and I both know the Chinese state would not allow pro-democracy groups to be teaching English in Chinese universities. It is sometimes slightly extraordinary that the CCP has such access to our students. But perhaps more concerning is when you look at the amazing academic institutions that we have in the UK, which are genuinely world-class. As you know, 3 of the top 10 universities are British, and we have some of the best research going on here in the UK that is then generating ideas. And then you look at who's funding or how they're being funded, or you look at who is studying in some of these sites, and you see that there are areas where, frankly, a few more questions wouldn't go amiss. Now that's where I'm working with George Freeman, who's our universities minister, to see what we can do together. Now, just for the record, there are some fantastic universities and fantastic vice-chancellors who are looking at this and understand the risk and understand the challenge, and they really are looking at it in a very serious way. Others have a different perspective. But this is an area where we really are focused on making sure we're getting the right answers for British universities across the whole of the United Kingdom and making sure that that investment in ideas here in the UK actually delivers for the UK. Now, I love a geeky question, so forgive me as I go into the Computer Misuse Act. Look, let's not forget, it was written before there was the internet, right? So it is not exactly designed for today. And it's written in such a way that any infiltration on a computer is by definition an offence, which is odd because it's impossible to have software today that does not automatically feed into an item, an electronic item. It's also designed for a computer that is a standalone device. It's not designed for a computer that is a watch or a Fitbit or whatever it might be. I don't know what Apple's going to come up with next, but it's not designed for that. So there's a hell of a lot of rethinking to be done, and the government at the moment is listening, because it wouldn't be right to try and do this without actually having full engagement with many other sectors that have got opinions and ideas on this, particularly not the tech sector, which is, after all, the bit that needs to be regulated in order to protect individuals, but at the same time enable the successes that we've seen in recent years. So I think that is a huge challenge, but you're absolutely right that is, I'm afraid, slightly out of date. And your point towards Brexit, look, you know how, I mean, it's on the record how I voted, and it's on the record how my views on this. But I can tell you one thing for simple, which is you've got to look to the future, not the past. The relationship we've got to have with our European partners has got to be productive and aspirational and future focused. You know, we can look at the past, and depending on how you count, the last 3,000 years, 5,000 years, I don't know how you want to count it, but let's say 3,000 years. You can look at European history, and there are periods where we've been to war with each other, there are periods where we've married each other, periods where we've invaded, periods where we've traded. You know, this has ebbed and flowed, right? It is unquestionably the case that with or without Brexit, our relationship with our European partners has almost never been better. The level of engagement, the proximity of relationships, not just because my wife is French, but the proximity of relationships has never been closer. You see young people coming and going, studying in different places. You see, and tech-enabled now, you see the most extraordinary businesses where, enabled by fintech based here in the UK or sometimes coming out of Estonia or other places, means that you have companies that exist nowhere but online, where people are being paid through apps that work out tax, that work out exchange rates, that work out share ownerships, all automatically. And so you have a Europe that exists in many ways, whatever agreements we have. Now, does that mean that we should stop our aspirations with the Windsor Accord? No, absolutely not. And Rishi certainly wouldn't suggest that either. You know, what we need to be looking at is a Europe that works for all of us. And in some ways that will be youth exchange schemes. Canada has a youth exchange scheme with Sweden, for example. Doesn't have one with Romania. That's their choice. We have a defence agreement with France that we don't have with Germany. That's our choice. We have intelligence sharing agreements with, well, I won't go into them, but with different European partners and not with all. That's our choice. And we need to be better at looking at how that bilateral works at different ways to improve the opportunity and the outcome for all of us. So you can, if you like, you can repeat the psychodrama of the last 6 years and talk about having another referendum and another vote and another whatever. Or you can look to the future and you can look at the bits of the European economy, the bits of the European society that you want to work with and find ways of making it work. And I think that's where we need to focus, and as Conservatives, where we need to be looking for partners and friends. And I think we can do that.
Can I push you a little bit on that Brexit?
Yeah.
So we did a report, Missing Millennials, a little while ago, and didn't give a huge amount of priority to Brexit and explanation of why millennials weren't voting for the Conservatives, partly because it didn't come up in the polling. What did come up was a feeling that the Conservative Party were dishonest, right? There was something about them not being clear and candid. And I think you're absolutely right, adopting a sort of rejoin type narrative would be a disaster. But some of the arguments against us were, if the Conservative Party were more honest about some of the negative impacts of Brexit, particularly in the last few years, the disruption that it's caused, and the fact that very few of the material benefits that were meant to come from it have materialised, or certainly have materialised for young people. And so they would argue that just a bit of candour about that would be useful in persuading those voters. Did you find that argument persuasive?
So look, I'm not going to lie to you that there haven't been challenges from Brexit. Of course there have been challenges. You're in a treaty agreement for 40 odd years and then you get out of that treaty agreement. Guess what? There are challenges. Yeah, sure, there are. You know, our membership of the European Union lasted roughly the same time as the Hohenzollern Empire in Germany. You know, Imperial Germany was about 47 years total. You know, these things cause frictions, right? When you join or you leave organisations, there are frictions. That's true. But I think the way that we're approaching it, you know, will result in different ways of approach. You know, different benefits too. And if we engage with our European friends in a positive way, then we can certainly have the opportunities, or different, sure, but opportunities from our European partnership. But we can also have benefits from other things. So one of the things I'm, you know, genuinely really pleased about is you look at what Kemi and Rishi have achieved by signing the CPTPP. Mm-hmm. Now, the comprehensive and progressive, because we're all Canadians now, Trans-Pacific Partnership is enormously important because that is a massively growing part of the world. And you know, you've heard me talking about China, you've heard me talking about China's attempts to reshape the world. Our engagement in organisations like CPTPP is hugely important to make sure that we are shaping the world too. Yep. And so actually, you know, let's not pretend this is all negative or all positive. It's a choice, right? And choices have upsides and downsides, they just do. Mm-hmm. One of the choices we made recently was to leave the European Union and to focus on other parts of the world. Well, that's what we're doing. Our relationship with the CPTPP is enormously important. Our relationship with India is enormously important, and you've heard me talking about that far too often, probably, Adam. But our relationship with India is enormously important. Our relationship with AUKUS is enormously important. And, you know, there will be others too. And, you know, personally, I look at Nigeria today and see enormous amounts of hope and opportunity. You know, there are many parts of the world we need to be focused on as well. And if you look at modern Britain, one of the things that's striking about modern Britain that is different from modern Europe is quite how international modern Britain is. You know, if you look at who Europeans in their 30s have married, they've mostly married other Europeans, normally people from their own country, but other Europeans. If you look at who Brits in their 30s have married, yeah, it's mostly other Brits, that's true, but it's people from around the world. It's not Europeans. Not exclusively, of course. There's a few of us who made that bold choice.
There you go. That's the pitch. Good. Okay, let's take a few more questions. I think there's some hands that shot up. One there, one from the back there, and then that might be all we've got time for. So let's go with the one here. Just wait for the mic to come and speak directly into it. Yeah.
Hello. Yeah. Hi, Tom. I'm Ethan. I'm from the Manchester Young Conservatives. I just wanted to ask, as a young person, I know other young people that are quite worried by the threat of AI and the security risks that could have for us, especially in the future, not necessarily now, but 20 years down the line. As a young person, I'm quite worried about the threat of AI, so I don't know if you can give us any assurances that what you're doing might be able to cut out that threat for future. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. And then question at the back.
Hi, Rhiannon from Marshall. I've actually got two questions. So the first one is around, you've kind of talked about trade, you've talked a bit about defence and what we're doing there, and also kind of Five Eyes relationships, NATO, that type of thing. I guess my question is, how are you using kind of the brief, the security brief, to kind of feed into those other agendas across government and kind of being that convener of our security in those conversations? And is there a role for industry in kind of the stuff you're doing, and what does that look like, and what do you want to see?
Very good.
Okay. So the question on AI is huge, as you know, and it's hugely transformative as well. I mean, at the moment, as you know, we're dealing mostly with large language models that are actually really more machine learning than they are artificial intelligence. It's less artificial and more mechanical. But the reality is, these problems are growing. The problems are also opportunities. We're going to be seeing huge efficiencies in the way we analyze information and the way we extract useful data from the haystack that I mentioned earlier. So in many ways that will make life more secure. I mean, one of the things at the moment is, I won't tell you how many, but it takes an awful lot of people to follow one terrorist suspect, for example. But as you get better at AI, as AI gets better at helping you, you're more able to narrow down the targets you're looking for, the reasons you're following people, and therefore your ability to focus your efforts against specific targets. It's also true, however, that AI will throw up many challenges, and this is where I think the government is doing absolutely the right thing. And if you see what the Prime Minister's organised for the beginning of November, this AI summit, I think this is a really important way of getting that conversation out there. If you like, it's a way of talking about the Manhattan Project before you build the bomb. Now that's a really healthy thing to do. You want to have a nuclear non-proliferation treaty before anybody's got a nuclear bomb. That's what we're trying to do. And I think it's incredibly healthy that we're doing it. Now, it's going to throw up challenges. I'm not going to lie to you, it is going to throw up challenges. But those challenges are real for us because they throw up different ways of understanding how we operate in our space. I have to say, if I were Chinese, I'd be even more worried. And the reason I would be is if you're Chairman Xi, a lot of your control depends on control of information. And what artificial intelligence promises to do, we'll see how it delivers it, but what it promises to do is to change the way in which information is controlled. And that change in informational control is hugely challenging for authoritarian states. And it really undermines their ability to deliver the promises that they have made. Now, we have to continue this conversation to see how it evolves. But I wouldn't be too concerned at the moment. I'd be focused on what we can achieve and how we can shape friends and partners to make sure we deliver. Rhiannon, you asked about trade and NATO. I mean, a lot of my role, as you know, is focused on day to day, I'm afraid. What the Iranians are doing every day in trying to, if I put it politely, I'd say disrupt. If I were to put it bluntly and honestly, kidnap and kill people in the United Kingdom takes up an awful lot of time. What the Chinese are doing in order to hack into our systems takes an awful lot of time, and I'm afraid what the Russians are doing through ransomware and many other things takes up an awful lot of time. But you're right that having an ethos of security through our systems is incredibly important, and that's why the work that we're doing in terms of building up resilience in our supply chains, which we do alongside the Department for Business and Trade, and Nuzgani is absolutely brilliant at this, is incredibly important. So, injecting that level of thought into it is what I'm trying to help do. A lot of the time I don't need to, because actually Nuz is brilliant on this, but there's an awful lot there. And your second question about industry is absolutely essential. Look, the reality is that the great strength of our country is that the state doesn't try to do everything. The enormous strength of our country is that businesses around the country, some of them one person at a computer, some of them 1,000 people with sites all over the continent, let alone the country, are coming up with ideas that answer questions that we didn't even know we needed to ask. And that partnership between industry and business and government is absolutely essential to our national security. It's absolutely fundamental. And one of the most interesting things I do is see pitches from companies who are pitching into the intelligence work, into our intelligence community. And you find out things that you had absolutely no idea could be done in ways that you had no idea were possible in order to answer questions you didn't even realize you needed to ask. And it's phenomenal to see what the individual creativity can have when it's unleashed. The left constantly tells us that the state can answer the question. We as Conservatives know free people answer questions freely. And that's how we get the best answers out of our whole society.
Fantastic. We might have time for another question or two. Yeah, but your hand's shot right up there at the front. So let's go with that question. If there are any more, we can take them in this round. But if not, then let's go for this one.
Thank you. Deborah Taylor, Deputy Leader of Leicestershire County Council. Just a quick question about asylum seekers that are coming over on the small boats. Do you think that creates a huge security risk for the UK?
So just a softball question to finish with.
Look, I'm not going to lie to you that it's the challenge, right? I mean, it takes up quite a lot of space in terms of thinking about how we deal with it. We are getting increasingly good at making sure we shepherd those who come off small boats into reception centres, and we analyse who's there, and we make sure we know what's going on, and through various different ways. In fact, some fantastic private companies that have demonstrated some capabilities, we're able to do many things upstream that, forgive me, I'm not going to expose to you right now, which mean that the risk is certainly mitigated. That said, there's a reason we're focused on stopping the small boats, right? There is an absolute reason we are focused on regular migration. Look, we as Conservatives believe that people from around the world who qualify, who have an interest or have a need, should be able to come to the UK. We absolutely believe in that. I mean, if you don't believe me, look at what we did with Hong Kongers, who we welcomed with open arms. Look at what we did with Ukrainians, who we welcomed with open arms. We absolutely do believe that we have a role and a duty in the world to welcome those in need or who offer an opportunity to the UK. And I'm very proud of the way that Rishi has led on various of the visa schemes, including this global opportunity scheme, where if you've been to one of the top universities in the world, you can get a visa for 2 years without a job just to come and see. But all of that only works if you also have a responsibility, a responsible attitude to your border. And this is where, forgive me, I find Labour just frankly disingenuous. When they talk about safe and legal routes, they're ignoring all the safe and legal routes that we already have. They're ignoring all the opportunities that we already give, and saying that what we actually need to be doing is we need to be building a bridge from Calais to Kent. Now, that's not the right answer. It's really not the right answer. But it's also not just the right answer that we can close the border at Dover and pretend that upstream pressures don't count. And that's where the work that Rob Jenrick has been doing, unsung, uncelebrated, has been so important. Rob Jenrick, as you know, is the immigration minister, and I have been working with partners in Southern Europe and around the region. I've been in Iraq recently and talking about those upstream pressures. Because actually, it's not just the numbers who get to Dover, it's the numbers who arrive at Calais. And that's why what happens in Lampedusa, what happens in Italy, what happens in France matters to us. So we're working with partners in Europe, and this, to the gentleman behind you's question about how do we work together with our European friends, this is one of those areas where we're offering huge capabilities, and I'm not going to advertise, to help interrupt some of those migrant routes is so important. Because let's be absolutely clear. It's not just that we already offer safe and legal routes. It's not just that we already recognise our responsibility to a wider society. It's not just that it would also be wrong to reward those who are breaking the rules and undermining our borders. It's that the trafficking that leads to it is one of the worst crimes that we are seeing in the world today. You know, we quite rightly focus on the English Channel and on the threats there. It's absolutely right. And when we see capsized boats and people drowning in the Channel, quite rightly we feel that pang of anguish and pain that any human suffering brings. And it's absolutely right we focus on that. I can assure you that the information that I see that doesn't just show that the English Channel is dangerous, the Mediterranean is even more dangerous. And if you think the Mediterranean is dangerous, look at the Sahara. Human trafficking and illegal migration is leading to some of the worst elements of human misery that this world has seen in many, many years. Every single mile along that Sahara route is marked by bodies. Every single arrival in Libya is matched, sadly, by the trade in human beings for sexual exploitation or simply for labour slavery. It is an absolutely horrific trade in human beings. And the last mile is the crossing at Dover. We need to be upstream and stopping it. Not just about our own security, but because it's the right thing to do, it's the humanitarian thing to do, and it's the responsible thing to do for every country.
Well, Tom, thank you. It feels like a somber note to end on, but thank you for indulging a very wide-ranging conversation on a range of different topics. Certainly learned a lot about your politics, your brief, and got some tips maybe on being a bit more cautious security-wise than we might have been before.
Two-factor authentication. Change your password.
Yeah.
If you do the simple things right, you'll be okay.
Okay, very good. The British government says. Thank you. Thank you for taking the time. Thank you to you all for coming along and for offering your questions. I feel very bad for sort of jettisoning you out into this extraordinarily rainy Manchester evening, but that is what I'm going to do. So thank you very much for coming along. I hope to see you at one of our events tomorrow. Please take a water bottle on your way out. Thank you, round of applause.